Okay, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Niamh O'Keefe. I'm a graduate of the Washington Ireland class of 2007, and it's fantastic to be with you all here this evening. Welcome to the Washington Ireland Year in Review. I'm delighted to be joined by our generous sponsors, members of the WIP board, our host family, alumni of the programme, and very importantly, potential students. The format for this evening is we're going to hear from two of our key supporters and then one of the graduates of the class of 2020. And then we're going to hand over to the main event where we're going to hear from former WIPper Tánaiste Varadkar and newly appointed Deputy White House Chief of Staff and indeed WIP board member Jen O'Malley Dillon. So before we start, we'd like to have a few words from the Deputy Ambassador, Emer Rock. The Irish Embassy in DC has been one of the programme's longest standing supporters. So we're delighted to have Emer here this evening. Unfortunately, she's just had a minor issue with her camera, so we might just hear from her rather than see her. But Deputy Ambassador, it's great to hear from you.
Hi everybody, thanks Niamh. I'm not sure if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
I don't think I still seem to be having technical camera issues, but we'll carry on anyway. So listen, hi everybody, and thanks Niamh for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here this evening representing the embassy. I want to add my congratulations to WIP on its AmCham award that Ambassador Mulhall presented this morning. First and foremost, I have a few thank yous that I'd like to make. Firstly, to the WIP board for your constant attention to making and keeping this programme great. To all the supporters and the organisations and members of Congress that provide the opportunities for internships for the programme participants. And we're very lucky to have Senator Chris Murphy, I think, was due to be here tonight as well. So he's been a great friend of Ireland up to now. So and to the legion of host families who open their homes and, more importantly, their hearts to the participants of the programme and provide that homely touch that matters so much. For the alumni, for their engagement, for being great ambassadors for WIP and for encouraging others to sign up to the programme, we're always grateful for that. It matters a lot. And finally, if you're considering being a WIP applicant, just do it. I'm pretty certain you won't regret it. I've been lucky enough to be involved tangentially with WIP for about 10 years now, and it's been kind of a thread running through my last few postings in the Department of Foreign Affairs, in the Irish Abroad Unit, in our British-Irish relations, and now here in DC. And I've been hugely impressed by the work and the ethos of the programme. I've also had the pleasure to work alongside some of the interns as colleagues, and some who've continued on and made their careers in the department with us, and they've always been characterised by their unfailing optimism, their work ethic, their spirit of collegiality, and their can-do attitude. And so it's been a huge pleasure working with them. And of course, this applies to our political alumni as well. Isn't that right, Tánaiste? Prior to taking up duty here last September, I visited Washington in the summer, and I was lucky enough to take part in the WIP event on the Hill, which was an incredibly moving evening for me, and it kind of stuck with me afterwards, and it's kind of inspired me a lot through the work that I do here in Washington. A member of the class that year, Emer Smith was her name, Emer Nigan, spoke about her journey and what brought her to WIP. And what I took from Emer's words that night, however, was a one word, and that was hope. And it said it was a hope of a generation who've grown up in peace, a generation who do not see things in binary terms, who don't just think about Northern Ireland in green or orange, but a generation who are interested in kind of global issues and have more in common with each other than what sets them apart. And that, for me, has been a huge takeaway from the programme, and as I say, has inspired me through the last year here in Washington. It also reminded me that night of the links between Ireland and Northern Ireland and the US, and how vital these are, and how vital WIP's role in fostering these are, and how they introduce future leaders from Ireland and Northern Ireland to the US system and allow them to give them a chance to make lasting connections. This is kind of particularly important at a time when, you know, it's not as easy for Irish people to come and live in America as it used to be, and I think that's a very relevant connection. Because the US interest in Ireland is as important now as it has ever been, and it's always allowed us to find the best in ourselves and to rise above our differences. So building connections is a big part of our work in the embassy. So it's nice when we have people who make our job a bit easier. And then to say I'm personally excited about the future here. I'm working in the embassy in Washington at a time when we have the most Irish president since JFK proposed to take up office in the White House. And I can't wait to be part of that and building the connections with the new administration. And I'm delighted, and it's no surprise that the president-elect's campaign manager is a WIP alum, and I'm delighted and looking forward to hearing from Jen O'Malley Dillon and looking forward to working with her in the future as well. So I've tried to reflect a little bit on 2020, and it's been a really tough year for everyone and a real testament to WIP that they've been able to keep the programme going. And I know for many, this year has brought a lot of loss and pain and suffering, and we think about those people that will find this Christmas is going to be a really difficult one, and we keep those people in our thoughts. I was trying to reflect on what it's meant for the embassy and the consulate team here in the US, and I think about when just shortly after St. Patrick's Day and the madness of that, which I'm sure the Tánaiste will remember well, and how we had to pivot into a consular emergency mode where the priority was getting Irish people home from the US and from everywhere else and around the world. And I look back and I think that was a real source of pride for all of us here. And it reminded us that, the core of our work here is about people. And I think that has been something that we've been able to take with us and bring with us and drive us through the rest of the year. And initiatives like Sláinte 2020 in New York, where the community have come together to help those less fortunate through the pandemic has been really important. And I hope that our new To Be Irish at Christmas initiative will help us bring a little bit of joy to those, especially those people who can't go home this year for Christmas, who would normally do that. So I suppose, as Ambassador Mulhall has always said, diplomacy is a face-to-face business, and we're really missing the face-to-face, none more than now when we're technical issues mean I can't see everybody. But it hasn't all been doom and gloom, and technology has, for the most part, meant that we've been able to keep in touch with people and do at least some of our work. And at least now we're starting 2021 with on a more positive note with the vaccine, and hopefully looking forward to when we can have these kind of events in person again. I suppose it has taught us that, not to take things for granted, and not to that we are social creatures and that we do kind of depend on one another a lot. Saying that, I'm glad 2020 is nearly over, and I'm looking forward to 2021. And all I want from Santi is a nice Brexit deal, so we can put 2020 in the past and begin the future with a bit of optimism and a fresh start. So thank you again, and thanks for allowing me this opportunity to talk to you, and thanks again, Niamh, for this. I'm sorry about the camera issues.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much, Deputy Ambassador, and thanks so much to you and Ambassador Mulhall and all the team in the embassy. We really appreciate it. Next this evening, we're going to have a few short remarks from Andrew Elliott, who's the Director of the Northern Ireland Bureau in Washington, DC. The Northern Ireland Bureau has been another long-standing friend of the programme, and WIP relies heavily on them for their support that they provide in DC. And I understand that they're increasing, or maybe due to increase, their funding for the virtual programme in 2021. So we're really delighted and excited to have their support again in the year ahead. So I'll hand over to you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Niamh, for the introduction, and thanks also to Brian and the entire Washington Ireland programme team for putting this lovely event together. It's really important to reflect at the end of what has been really quite a remarkable year for Northern Ireland and indeed for the world. It's also great to be here speaking together with Emer, as WIP is very much a North-South programme which both the Irish government and ourselves, the Northern Ireland Executive, support together. The Bureau's involvement with WIP this summer was an incredibly rewarding and inspiring experience, and not just because we were able to work with a group of interns who were exceptionally dedicated, enthusiastic and innovative, but also because I was able to see at firsthand how Brian and the team responded to the incredibly difficult public health situation that was presented by COVID-19, and yet still delivered a really effective programme in the most challenging of circumstances, making excellent use of modern technologies to give the young people that are involved a fantastic exposure to a range of superb leaders and influencers from the United States and right across the country. Our own interns prepared an extensive database of congressional members for us and made a very substantial contribution to our overarching international relations objectives in the Bureau. And the high quality work that they generated will actually be an asset for the Bureau and will serve as a really useful resource for years to come, as indeed will the lasting impression that they as individuals made on us. We really look forward with interest to watching their careers develop, knowing from the example of our speakers today, the heights to which they can now aspire. It's really good for us folks who are slightly longer in the tooth to remember that today's WIP generation is one that has known only peace on the island of Ireland following the Belfast Good Friday Agreement of 1998. This is the modern Northern Ireland, a Northern Ireland with an executive working together to make difficult decisions. And boy, have there been some difficult ones with both COVID and Brexit impacting at the same time. President-elect Joe Biden has recently spoken of the importance in the US of reaching across the aisle, of working together with political opponents, not enemies. That's something that is the bread and butter now of government in Northern Ireland, where politicians from right across the political spectrum collaborate daily together to make decisions that impact immediately on the lives of citizens. We are fortunate to have such a close relationship as we do with the United States. Northern Ireland is at the forefront of innovative technology with a talented and really well-educated pool of young people. So it makes it an attractive destination for business, tourism and leisure. And it's reflected in the scale of American inward investment to the region. And long may that continue. This programme contributes to all that by giving effect to some of the key priorities of the Northern Ireland Executive around supporting the development of our young people, equipping them with the skills and the experiences they need to support a forward-thinking and an outward-looking global Northern Ireland. So like Emer, I highly recommend that students take the time to really look at this programme and go for it. It will be an experience you will never forget. In closing, I want to thank all of our own interns, Emer, Owen, Grace, Rachel, Mark, Roisin and Stephanie for their hard work and dedication this summer. And I want to say another big thank you once again to Brian and the team for their excellent support, to the Bureau and for the fantastic programme that they provide for students from right across the island of Ireland. Thank you all very much.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Director Elliott, and great to have the shout out of it, this year's crop of interns, and it brings me on very nicely to our last speaker before the main event, who is Naomi Veda. So I'm delighted to welcome her from the class of 2020. Naomi has a pretty extraordinary academic track record, including being an inaugural George Moore Scholar, and she's currently in her first year of a PhD in Princeton, which she started remotely a few months ago. But to my mind, more impressively than any of that, and what really sums up, I think, the spirit of WIP, is that when a poll was done of this year's class about the person who influenced them the most and the person they learned the most from this year, Naomi was actually the person who came top of the charts by an overwhelming majority. So we're really excited to hear from her and to have her perspectives on her year and her experience with WIP. So I'll hand over to you, Naomi.
Thank you, Niamh. Esteemed guests, thank you so much for having me here today. Please allow me to start with one of my favorite poems from Emily Dickinson. It says, "I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors." When a great opportunity comes along, it can overwhelm your imagination, just like prose. It can open the door to positive impact and personal growth in ways that are superior to what you thought possible for yourself. And it can pull the curtain on numerous new windows or fresh perspectives. I think that WIP truly encapsulates both the feel and the look of this house of possibilities. And so this evening, I'd like to take you on a tour of this space, to invite you to see what we have built this summer and hopefully excite future generations of supporters and alumni to come build with us. So the start of the summer was a little disappointing. We saw this dust settle on unused parts of this house, like in-person events or cross-cultural experiences abroad. But that prompted us to invent and renovate, thanks to your help as supporters and the awesome work of Brian, Quiva, and Sammy. We turned in-person internships into flexible online collaborations, in-person debates and workshops to virtual murals and virtual Zoom breakout sessions where we could debate and discuss and even write some policy papers. And we've also benefited so much from the support of alumni through their mentorship. My own mentor, Sharon, was so well matched to me that we actually continue to speak today in addition to our initial commitment, and I think that we'll continue to do so. I think that all of these things speak to the legacy of our house, the strength of our house, the resilience and the community of our house. But really, what fascinates me most about our house of possibilities and what we're building are not the doors of opportunities, but the windows of those perspectives. This year, those windows have fascinated me in numerous ways. Firstly, when you open that window, light and air hits you directly, and it's refreshing precisely because of that directness. Coming from a place of academic people, there's often a fear that what you express that is not the majority view will end up becoming what you are ostracized for. But at WIP, I was constantly surprised by how open people were. They were direct and forthright and unafraid to provoke and to challenge and do the same and feel the same from others. There wasn't a fear judgment, and the people on our program, our class, was not selected just for intellectual merit, but also for personal experience as an end in itself. And for me, that was both refreshing and liberating. I could really be myself. And I think coming from different scholarship backgrounds, I would say that this is truly unique to WIP. I am so glad that we were able to preserve this summer and really looking forward to doing so in the future. But the other thing I really love about those windows are the views. My view has certainly enlarged and grown complex. Part of that because of the speakers, the global leaders that we've invited into our house of possibilities, who have pointed out windows that I'd previously not looked through and shadows and shades that I had previously ignored. They've challenged me to see many things, for example, like the role of business in sustainability in Ireland and how corporate culture can be positive, the role of tax in Ireland, and even things like how to negotiate our first salaries or how to be practical leaders in a time of change. I think that what is unique to our year is actually the Zoom. I think that our intimate space allowed people to really be raw and real with us, sharing compelling stories that might not have been so obvious had we been in a conference hall, and also to get a diversity of speakers that we may not have met in person. And for that, my class and I are super grateful for this opportunity to both alumni and supporters. In short, as we finish our tour and admire this beautiful house that we're building together, I think I've learned one main lesson, and it's this. The people who change the world, the people who are going to change Ireland, are not the problem solvers, but they are the problem finders. They are the people who anticipate the issues ahead to leverage their resources and access them at the best time with the best that we can have. As our speakers have said, the answer is always no if you never ask the question, and even if you get a really good answer, it's pretty useless if the question has changed. So, as for me and my class, we are thrilled to continue to be problem-finding individuals, to leverage those resources and dwell in possibilities. And we are so grateful that you've given us the chance to experience that this summer. And thank you so much for your time today.
That was beautiful, Naomi. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you and all the class of 2020 for making it through a pretty extraordinary year, but also it sounds to me like making the absolute most of it. Before we hand over to the director of the Washington Ireland programme, Brian Patton, we just want to say a quick thank you to some of our sponsors here this evening. And Naomi is very kindly going to be on the decks there and pull up a few people who we'd like to say thank you to. If you pop the slide there, Naomi, that's okay.
I think it should be up. Let me try that again for you. Can you see it now?
Yeah, that's great. So if you hop to the next slide, please. That's perfect. Thank you so much. So first of all, we'd just like to thank our ambassadors, Anne and Frank Cantrell Jr., Colm O'Comhartoon, James and Anne Burke, John Busher, Kevin Sullivan and Nell Henderson, and Susan Davis. We'd also like to thank our patrons, David Byrne, Ellen Kane O'Motley, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Patricia Ballana, Sue and Nick Christakis, Susie Hoffman. I might hop on again there. Our bronze sponsors, Rich and Sally McHugh, and our silver sponsors, Carmel Martin, Robert Welp, Ed Meehan, Carol and Tom Wheeler, and the National Alliance for Fair Contracting. Thank you all very much. I see our star guests are in the corner there, so that's a good sign that the technology is working. So I'll hand you over to them. Thanks so much, everyone.
you to Naomi, to Andrew, Emer, and Neve for organising the first part of this conversation. So we're to the main event. I just wanted to make a few brief remarks before I introduce our panel, which is to say this is the WIP end of year event. We've had, like everyone else, an extraordinary 2020. I'm really proud of how the team and the supporters rallied together. I think we've talked, as Jen knows, around the board table a lot about the idea of WIP being a community and like not a program. And I think, you know, in these, when we were faced with challenge, it was the community of host families and alumni and other kind of core supporters that rallied around to make what we did in 2020 possible, which was very quickly shift the program online. And there's many of the class of 2020 that are joining us here tonight who delivered their programs from Dublin and Belfast and Coleraine and Cork and other parts as well. We also delivered the forums, which are supported by Bank of America online. And we also started doing a couple of new programs. So with Yale's program on peace and development and with the Centre for Democracy and Peace Building, we ran a program for emerging leaders in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the US. And we've also with Eva and the Centre for Democracy and Peace Building, we've just finished up an ethnic minority leadership academy in Belfast too. So we've been trying to do new things and take advantage of what the technology makes possible. What we will do in 2021 and what we're using this event to kick off is a much more ambitious program for 2021. So for now, we're expecting that we'll continue in this virtual world. But tonight we're launching our search for 2021. And we're going to seek to try and engage a larger group of students. And for the first time, we're going to be taking students who are studying in postgraduate studies as well. So we're hoping that people who are doing kind of diplomas and certificates otherwise will be able to access the program for the first time. Once we don't expect we'll be able to bring people to Washington or New York, we do expect we'll be able to bring Washington and New York to Dublin and Belfast. And we do hope to be hosting groups and senior leaders from the US on our side of the ocean. Also next year, we're going to be scaling our forums. So with the support of the Department of Foreign Affairs and with Bank of America, we hope that over 500 people will engage in WIP forums, which Senator Murphy actually launched the last time he was in Belfast in March 2019. So since March 2019, we've had 400 people go through the program of the WIP forum. And this year, in 2021, our ambition is that 500 people more will engage in ambitious conversations about our island's future. I'll just get the thank yous out of the way, which is that is, you know, couldn't be done without the support of an extraordinary group of people. Even this call has been made possible by the likes of Quiva, Kelly and Hope, and indeed Chris Brown and his team. But our plan for 2021 are made possible by some of the funds that have been raised from our end of year appeal. And around the WIP board, we've talked so much about trying to raise funds through this cause, and it was the WIP board led by Bjorn McConnell that's made that possible. Tonight, as we kind of reach this milestone in our end of year appeal and really focused around this event, we've raised $136,850, which is an extraordinary figure for WIP and makes a really meaningful difference to what we can do in 2020. So like I said, I'll close with some thanks at the end, but for now I want to shift on to the conversation with this extraordinary group of people. I have a page of bios for you all, but I'm conscious for time, so I'll just say that I'm joined by the Tánaiste, the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar, who's also a WIP alum from the class of 2000, which we're very proud of. We're joined from Washington by the US Senator for Connecticut, or one of the US Senators for Connecticut, Chris Murphy, and we're also joined by Jen O'Malley Dillon, the Biden for President campaign manager and board member to boot. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to just ask two core questions, and I'll just open the first one, and I might go, if it's okay, Jen, I might start with you, and then I'll go to the Senator and then to the Tánaiste. It's been an extraordinary year, and you've all held really pivotal leadership roles. And my first question is, reflecting on 2020, what's the most important leadership lesson that you've learned this year?
Oh, you should have given me notice of a question like that. I don't really know. I probably in the round in terms of managing the pandemic. It's listening to science. and understanding science. I won't say experts necessarily, because a lot of people are experts and have different views on things. So you listen to a range of experts, but you're guided by the science. And Ireland's response to the pandemic hasn't been perfect, but it has been one of the better responses, I think, in Europe and in the Western world. A lot of that is because decisions that we have been made have been guided by science and guided by facts. And in a world where there's a lot of populism, where emotion trumps facts a lot of the time, listening to science.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Jen, I might go to you next, if that's okay. Preva, you can just let us know if there's any further issues. So, and Senator, I'll come to you then afterwards. What was leadership lesson that you learned from this year?
Well, look, I think it's like everyone, the first is, how do you survive through a crisis, and in our country, multiple crises, and try to do that while, tackling a pretty significant campaign. And I think there's two things that I think about when it comes to this year. The first is discipline, and the second is nimbleness. And, we in the United States have really built a unique way to campaign. We do it all the time, but we've never had to do it through a pandemic. And so it really forced us to rethink everything we did, and to do it in a way that reimagined how you engage with people, how you find ways to meet them when you can't do it in the same ways you always had. And so that was a really hard challenge, but it also allowed us to recognize that people are going through something bigger than politics in a lot of ways. And so we had to find a way to show up for them. And I think the other piece, especially for our campaign, Vice President Biden, now President-elect Biden, started the campaign because he really believed that this was a battle for the soul of the nation. And that was really his driving vision for the campaign when he got in the primary. And throughout the course of our campaign, a lot of people questioned that, or they questioned our strategy, or questioned our tactics, people suggesting we needed to do more and be more public, even though we were in a pandemic. And we were able to really stay true to who the president-elect is, to his vision for the country, and to build a campaign that reflected that. And so while perhaps we got a lot of interest in what we were doing, we really had to stay disciplined. And I think we found that we had a leader that allowed us to feel comfortable that we were making the right choices, because it was really reflected in his leadership. And so, ultimately, I think those are the two biggest takeaways that I have from 2020.
Great. Senator Murphy, can we call on you?
Certainly, and let me just say at the outset how excited I am to be here with all of you, and in particular the Tánaiste and Jen. But let me first agree with the lessons that they've drawn out, and maybe add two more. The first is the value of consistency in message. In a moment of crisis, it is important that the country and people who are faced with dire circumstances are hearing the same thing from day to day. Now, sometimes strategy has to change, sometimes tactics have to be amended, but there was a additional layer of aggravation, consternation, and frustration put upon the American people over the last year, because we had to endure a leader who couldn't keep a message or a plan or a strategy to fight this pandemic consistent for one single day. And as Jen mentioned, the president-elect throughout his campaign was absolutely consistent in his message. And I think part of the reason why he won was that he showed the ability to be able to manage both a tumultuous campaign, but also a response as a leader that people listened to in the middle of the pandemic. The second thing I think that I found is the importance of rightly aligning your allegiances. In this business, we often tend to put on our party stripes first. But in moments of crisis, you have to remember that first, you're an American. Your duty is first to the country, not to your party. And I'll give just a very sort of brief example of how that accrued to our benefit in Connecticut. In Connecticut, we were able to turn the corner very quickly in the early stages of the virus. And that was in part because Republicans in Connecticut got behind masks, helped to lead the message about wearing masks. They didn't behave like some of their party members in other parts of the country, but in Connecticut, it was really bipartisan. And I think folks in our state, especially in those really awful days of March and April and May, realized that they could sort of put their jersey as a Connecticut resident and as an American on first, and save the political fights for another day.
I think, Senator, that kind of really links into a lot of the values of the Washington Ireland program around, how do we come together, if we want to tackle big issues. And Jen, I'm thinking of your mantra for the last little while, but if we are to do big things, how, doing them in a way where we're working with others, obviously work with people we don't agree with. Obviously, Tánaiste knows the language we use a lot is kind of a network of non-like-minded people. How do we build the skills to actually work together with people you don't necessarily agree with, but try and develop ambitious solutions to really tricky, challenging problems? This year with, I'm thinking of your own state with some of your colleagues or some of your constituents in Yale, we've been thinking about, the future of democracy, which obviously we think about in the context of the US, but also, there are significant challenges for Ireland and for the UK and for Europe around how we engage with democracy. So I think you're touching on a really kind of valuable point and that kind of resonates very strongly with a lot of our work. I'm going to just shift to a second question, if that's okay. And Jen, if it's okay, I'll come to you first this time. And then I'll go to the Senator, and then I'll come to the Tánaiste. So Jen, I suppose a question that we talk about with the WIP class and a theme around leadership is, one, that leadership is an action, that it's not a position or a role, but it's actually a decision to try and make something happen and to bring some change about. And also that you never get it perfectly right, that you have to relate to different situations and you have to adapt your approach as you go along. So when you think about 2020, what would you do differently? What are the kind of, from a leadership perspective, as you look back on your year? I don't mean this from like a responding to polling response, but just kind of from yourself in the leadership position, the extraordinary leadership position you've had this year, what would you do differently?
Well, I'm not sure how long this panel is, but I could speak on all the things, big and small, that I would have liked to have done differently. And I agree with you. In leadership, it is so important to constantly just take a look at where there's opportunity for growth. And for me personally, I just think that leading this campaign was certainly the hardest thing that I have ever done. It was made a lot easier by having a candidate that was leading the country, and in many ways, to what Senator Murphy laid out, was not only running for president, but often being the voice of president in the vacuum that we had in the country. And that was really, an important part of the campaign, but made it easier for me to do the job that I needed to do. I think one of the biggest lessons, and I'm thinking about this as we're heading into a holiday time, when it comes to campaigning, you're also often thinking about different types of voters and, your supporters, your opponent's supporters, who are you going to talk to? How do you have the conversations? And when you think about holidays, you probably all say the same, don't talk about politics at the holidays, don't bring it up, we shouldn't talk about that stuff. And I think what I've learned, is there were so many people that we still didn't reach, that we maybe did not have the conversations we needed to. And because of that, I think that that's in part what's happening with the polarization in our country. People are only hearing from sources that they are engaging with. They're not opening themselves up to listen to others and hear those perspectives. The president-elect always says that one of the most important things about leadership is to listen. And I think we have left a void in the conversation in the country. And I think you really see that apparent in what's happening in the United States right now, where many leaders of our country will not call the president-elect the president-elect. Many of Trump's supporters don't believe that we won fairly, and they believe fraud when nobody has seen fraud. And so I don't bring that up as a partisan point. I just bring that up as a really kind of fundamental part of leadership, which is finding a way to always be listening, to go to places and to people and have the conversations to better understand and empathize with where they're coming from. And I think that if you can do that as an individual leader and also as a party and as a a leader in the country, I think it will make us stronger. And if we don't, then we end up, I think, in some of the situation we find ourselves in now, which we have so much work to do. And it's going to take all of us. We can't solve this just from one side to bring the country back together and heal from not just the crisis of the pandemic, but the crisis of the polarization of our politics that we all are being impacted by.
Well, I could cite you chapter and verse on all of the things we should have done differently as a country over the last year with respect to fighting the virus. It's been mistake after mistake, and hopefully these are lessons learned so that this never ever happens again. There will be another pandemic, but I'd frankly love to just pick up on where Jen left off, because I know it is the mission of the Washington Ireland program to bring people together who have different perspectives, because I think this phenomenon has gotten worse over the last year because we have all been sheltering in place, right? Some of the few opportunities that we had to interact with people who thought differently from us have been stolen from us, right? We're no longer sitting on the sidelines of our kids' sports games. We're not sitting together at our school PTA meetings. We're in our homes, and unfortunately, more often than not, tuning on whatever channel or clicking on whatever website just confirms our own biases. And I know that that's a broader phenomenon that was in action way before the pandemic, but I think it's gotten worse. And so I frankly think we should learn from WIP, right? I mean, we have to actually think about how to construct mechanisms in our country for people of different minds and different backgrounds to speak to each other, to be in the same place together. It's frankly one of the reasons why, I work so hard, for instance, on integrating schools, because I don't think anybody can understand race relations in America if you've never had a friend that was of a different race. But I think that work is even more important. It's probably something that leaders like me should have spent more time on prior to the pandemic, and it certainly would be on a list of my regrets, something that we now all have to work on moving forward.
Senator, thanks so much for those kind words. And I particularly noted, in your role in the Foreign Relations Committee, I've been struck by, when you travel, you try and travel with a member on the Republican side. So I think there's really tangible, practical things that we can do to take those steps. So thank you for highlighting. I just want to acknowledge that practical action that I've certainly seen you take. So Tánaiste, can I come to you for this kind of last question of the panel of, what would you do differently? I think, you were the person probably with most executive responsibility in responding to this crisis. Certainly, we couldn't have prepared for it. But do you have any kind of reflections on 2020 and your own kind of personal leadership approach or style?
Yeah, well, I suppose one thing I would have done is not dissolve the Dáil and called elections on the 14th of January. Then lead with the opposition. Now Taoiseach, the person we're in coalition with, suggested an Easter election, and had that happened, we would have had the election after the pandemic, and perhaps it would have gone differently. Perhaps it would have gone a bit better for me and for my party. Who knows? You never know these things for sure. But we may have had a different electoral outcome, and of course, in my mind, one that would have been better for the country. But you never know these things for sure. It's one of the difficulties of not having fixed terms, I suppose. But I think in terms of the management of the pandemic, there's lots of things we would have liked to have done differently. Would it have been possible? Like most countries in the Western world, most people who died as a consequence of COVID were nursing home residents. And I think if we'd had the capacity to get in there quicker and do testing quicker, we would have. Or if we'd had the PPE, but we didn't. So it's not as if any decision there could have been made differently. But I definitely think one thing we hadn't done as European countries, and probably applies to North America too, is we collectively hadn't learned from SARS, for example. And I think one of the reasons why the Pacific countries have done so much better is they had SARS, and they spent years and billions of euros and billions of dollars building up public health systems, testing systems, contact tracing systems, all of that. Because we largely escaped SARS, we thought it would a pandemic wouldn't come our way, and when it it did, we hadn't made those preparations. But that was true across Europe and North America and around the world. Really, only the Pacific countries have that experience. So the lesson now is not to assume that the next time we face a major pandemic is in 100 years' time or 30 years' time. We just don't know, and we have to be prepared for the possibility that there may be one again, who knows, in 10 or 15 years' time. And we need to have all those systems in place, ranging from stockpiling to testing systems. You name it. This has to be a feature now of what governments do and what we prepare for, that public health response. I think, though, picking up on what Chris and Jen said, one kind of worry I have about Ireland actually is that our politics in some ways is going the way of American politics, much more polarized, much more identity based, and social media, at least in Ireland, is a big part of that. You know, the wrong end of the stick in an accurate story, one side of the story can just become accepted fact and truth within hours, because things aren't mediated anymore by the media. They're just put out there on social media. And, you know, one thing I found astounding about America was, you know, that the wearing of masks almost became a Republican versus Democrat thing, maybe not in Connecticut, but in lots of places. And to me, that was extraordinary. But we're even now talking in Ireland that there's opinion poll data suggesting that supporters of some parties are much more likely to take the vaccine than supporters of others, which is a taste of that. And, you know, I'm really worried. I don't know how to stop it, but I'm really worried that our politics, as is the case in lots of countries, might go down that line with the rise of populism and the power of social media to, you know, to accentuate that is a real worry for me. And I'm going to spend some of Christmas reading and thinking about how we can push back against that.
I think I'm going to.
It's all going on the Washington Ireland program together, I'm afraid. But I know what you mean.
I think this has been like a big theme of some of the conversations for the class and for, you know, the different programs that we've been kind of running. You know, where, like, I think whether it's in terms of how do citizens engage with executives and government when restrictions are needed, like how do we maintain a mandate, and like there's all these kind of democratic questions that I was hinting at the beginning, but then there's also there's questions of how do you work together, and obviously technology has great opportunity, but obviously even in the US this week there's questions around how that happens and how it's regulated and all sorts of other things. I think Ireland has a very interesting role, and there's a lot of people on this call that are potential WIP students. I think a big question for Ireland is, you know, we have a role as a regulator as part of, you know, our position within the EU. Like there's interesting questions for us around like what's our national role with all of that. So I suppose there's big questions around democracy, around identity. Senator, you talked about kind of race relations. I think, you know, that there's questions there as well. So you know, there's these kind of big questions, and it's how do we engage with that? I think a lot for the answer for the Washington Ireland program is to try and get some of the people on the call to apply for the class of 2021 and to start thinking about it. There's no answer. It's just a continual conversation about what our future looks like, and realizing that you have a responsibility and opportunity to engage in shaping that. I'm hoping that Suzanne Lynch is, I'm going to just come to, we have 3 questions lined up from the audience. Suzanne, I think, is in the backstage. She should be able to come and join us. I have her question lined up here. If not, and it does take just about a couple of seconds to shift from front to back. So Suzanne, I hope you're making your way towards us. But perhaps while we wait for Suzanne to make her way, I do have one question from Rebecca Black from the Press Association. So like I said, this is a kind of public and on the record event. So Rebecca has just sent me through hers whilst we wait for Suzanne. We'll last call for Suzanne, and I'll ask her question. So this is from Rebecca Black, and we'll start with Jen. President Biden is being feted as, or President-elect Biden is being feted as one of the most Irish presidents since JFK. How much of a factor was an Irish vote to his win? So I think, you know, I think he took Ballina is the short version. And do you think that the president-elect will make it a priority to visit Ireland once the pandemic has started to recede. Anyway, I know you're speaking in a personal capacity rather than anything else, but if you were guessing on places that the president-elect would like to visit, I suppose the question is, do you think Dublin or Belfast or Ballina are on the list?
I smell a setup here, Brian Patton. Obviously, the president-elect is a proud Irish American, and I think so much of the leader he is part of the story of his life and his life of resilience and leadership, and where he comes from and his roots, and a strong man of faith and strong values that are steeped in his life and growing up in Scranton, and stories that he often shares about his father and his mother. So there is no doubt that that's a big part of who he is. And in fact, one of the reasons that I think, and surprising I think to some, but that the president-elect did so well is because he built such a broad coalition of support across our country. He won seniors, he won young people, he had record enthusiasm. Obviously, 81 million people in the United States supported him, the most ever historic numbers. So it really, to win in this country and to have a mandate like the president-elect has coming into office requires that kind of support from all across the country and every type of voter, and every voter, whether they're engaged or not. And I certainly think that in seeing who he was, who he is, the leadership that he has, but also the empathy he has to people because of where he comes from and who he is and what he's gone through in his life, had a real impact and allowed him to connect with voters, whether they were Irish Americans or not. And to your other question, of course, I am here in a personal capacity, but I have promised myself that I will come back to Ireland. So if I ever have the chance, I would be happy to encourage him to come along.
I listen, although I don't think it would be appropriate for the incoming Deputy Chief of Staff to commit to where the president-elect is going to travel. She could commit to make sure to bring all of the Irish senators and congressmen along with the president-elect if he does go to Ireland. So I'll just put in that plug right now.
Can I just say in that, I'm going to state the obvious. Obviously, he's welcome anytime, and has been many times. If he can come soon, it'd be great. If he has to wait until after December 2022, that's fine with me as well. But one thing I would say, and I'd say particularly to the American audience, this week actually was a historic week for Ireland, because the withdrawal agreement, the Irish protocol, the backstop that we agreed 3 years ago with Prime Minister May, and then subsequently reaffirmed with Boris Johnson last year, that appeared to be under threat in the last couple of months. And even though there is no trade deal yet between the EU and the UK, the British government has decided to honour that withdrawal agreement in full. No hard border between North and South. Common travel area remains in place. The Good Friday Agreement fully protected. And I think the role of Congress, on a bipartisan basis, but particularly led by the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and the comments of Joe Biden, of President-elect Biden in recent weeks did make a difference. They did send a message, to anyone in London who might think otherwise, that this is somebody who isn't just of Irish heritage, but really cares about Ireland and understands some of our issues in real detail. And that made a big difference. And, anytime I go to America and meet Irish America, I'm always overwhelmed by the extent to which they really care about Ireland and do so much for us. And we owe them very little, because we understand the historical reasons why so many people had to leave. And we owe them very little. And I'm always bowled over when I go to America about how much Irish America cares about us and has our back. And I just wish there's some way in future that we can say thanks in a meaningful way.
Tánaiste, thank you for that, and I think it kind of tees up nicely a question. Suzanne, lovely that you've been able to make it through the technology to join us. So lovely to have you with us. I know you have a question for Senator Murphy, and if that's okay, can you?
Yeah, because the previous question was a question I was going to ask Jen. So thank you for that participant for asking it. But Senator Murphy, just to really pick up what the Tánaiste was saying there, just on Congress. I'm based here in Washington. I know Nancy Pelosi has been taking a very close interest in what's happening with Brexit. This week, we have seen a good development in that, like the British government have said they're going to stop the clauses that they're going to put in this new legislation. But people in Ireland are still worried about, the prospect of a no-deal Brexit and how that might affect things in Ireland. Is this something you're watching from, your office in Washington? And what would you say about the prospect, for example, of a US-UK trade agreement if the Northern Ireland issue is not resolved?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Suzanne. And I think the Tánaiste covered this very well. Many of us are, breathing maybe a half sigh of relief today as we hear these commitments being made once again to keep intact the Good Friday Agreement. And as the Tánaiste mentioned, we have really worked hard to keep our support for the Good Friday Agreement bipartisan. In the Senate, I joined with Senator Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania, to send a letter making clear that it was our belief that it was a bipartisan U.S. priority for any agreement between the UK and Europe to keep intact the entirety of the Good Friday Agreement, including a commitment to make sure there was no hard border. And we may have some different thoughts on both sides of the aisle regarding trade agreements, but I'll just speak for myself. I have made it clear that the United States should prioritize a trade agreement with Europe before it moves forward with a trade agreement with Britain. That's not to say a US-Britain trade agreement isn't important, but I do think that we want to send signals about the value that we place on multilateral organizations, especially at a moment when the EU is under threat, not just from the departure of Britain, but members that are very quickly walking away from some pretty serious commitments that everyone thought were being made communally about democratic norms. So I think that from my perspective, one of the ways that we can continue to support the maintenance of the Good Friday Agreement is to make sure that we are keeping on track a trade agreement with Europe. Difficult to achieve, but certainly not impossible. And we will continue to try to build this bipartisan support for the message that Senator Toomey and I sent.
Thanks, Suzanne. Folks, we're out of time, kind of running to the end of our time. So I'm going to just ask you, the last kind of audience question was around your hopes for 2021. So kind of look to lean slightly forward, but I'll kind of include that if it's okay with the kind of final closing remarks as well. And again, I might go in the same order as before, as I'll start with you, Jen, and go to Senator Murphy, and then end with the Tánaiste. So Jen, do you have any kind of final closing remarks for our year in review for 2020 and your hopes for 2021, other than coming to Ireland to visit us?
You know what, honestly, one of the things that I thought about as I was, contemplating being here today was how much I love this program and how honored I've been to be part of it. But I think the senator spoke to this. So much of WIP has been about bringing people together and unifying and finding ways for common good and opportunities to come together. And what I hope for 2021 for the United States certainly is to get the vaccines in the hands of the people of this country and the world, to take care of COVID and to rebuild the economy and to tackle the really important challenges we have, but also to try to reset the tone of how we as a country in the United States in particular, again, all across the globe could be less polarized and more unified. And I think you all have year after year really set that example of how you can do that in bigger and in small ways. Obviously, the legacy of this program is tremendous in terms of the leaders that have come through it, but also, finding ways to be part of community and to not just in the moment come together, but to take that back to their own communities. And I think our responsibility as citizens really is to have those conversations, to show up and talk about, where we agree and where we don't, and find opportunities to not be afraid to do that. And I think it's important as we go to 2021 to not think about tackling these big, massive problems. We obviously have to do that, but it's the small ones. It's the civility. It's the finding conversation and community that I think is going to make the difference and give us the best shot for rebuilding what in the United States we have so deeply lost in the last 4 years at a very accelerated rate. So I commend all of you guys, but I think WIP should continue to be an example, and I think really an opportunity for so many of us to learn from through the great work of everyone that's been part of it.
Thank you, Jen.
Again, thank you for including all of us. Really an honor to be here with the Tánaiste, and thank you, Jen, for saving this country over the course of your work in 2020. Look forward to working with you. I would just say that all of the things we've been talking about, all the challenges, whether they're challenges to democracy or the tone of debate or the health of our citizens, these are challenges that are shared across the Atlantic. These are challenges that exist here and exist in Ireland and throughout Europe. And so this is a moment for us to rebuild alliances. 2020 is a year for us to decide to tackle these challenges together. Democracy is at risk. We shouldn't assume that we're all going to be living under the same form of government 50 years from now if we don't figure out a way to fight back the forces of fracture and division and nationalism. There will be another pandemic, and we shouldn't just learn the lessons here in America. We should learn the lessons jointly and implement new protocols and defenses together with our friends. This is obviously at the core of Joe Biden's being, the belief in alliances. So I know that it will be central to his presidency, but he will have a lot of friends. And of course, our alliances begin with our friends in Dublin and throughout Ireland. They will be first and foremost in our mind when we seek to try to rebuild some of the bonds that have been broken over the last 4 years. That's one of my primary hopes for 2021.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's we didn't coordinate beforehand, but I think my answers are much the same. First of all, you know, a successful vaccination program that allows us this summer to do all the things we miss and love to do, whether it's foreign travel or going to matches or going to concerts and hugging our friends and family. And I think we'll all appreciate life a little bit better after this is over. And I think the triumph of science and modern medicine will be evident over the next couple of months as the vaccine works, as rapid testing becomes more effective, and as we learn more and more about how to treat and avoid the virus. So I'm looking forward to 2021 being fun, everyone being able to catch up on their lives, and also a very rapid economic bounce back. And I think that will happen, actually. It did happen after the 1918 pandemic, and I think it can happen again on this occasion. In fact, I'm very confident it will. And the second thing really is the restoration of American leadership in the world. It's like a lot of things, it's only when it's gone that you miss it. And a lot of people in Ireland and in Europe are very critical of America, but we've learned several times now in the last 100 years that when America withdraws from the world, it's not good for the rest of the world. By and large, America is a force for good. And having America back in the World Health Organization, back in committed to the Paris Climate Accords and taking climate action, in my own field, re-engaging with the World Trade Organization and multilateral structures respecting the UN, that'll make a huge difference because we are heading into a multipolar world in which China is growing and becoming much stronger, in which there are other powers around the world now. And I think what we need is to reestablish that American-European alliance that has served us all pretty well in the past century. And I'd be very keen for Ireland to be part of that and to be a bridge, albeit a small bridge, but a strong bridge between America and the European Union.
Tánaiste, I think it's a lovely note to end on, and obviously the Washington Ireland programme views itself as having a role of being part of that bridge, and we'll hopefully play a small part in maintaining that. I think I've been told by my colleagues that I didn't, in the earlier stage when I announced the amount of funds that we've raised from today, that it wasn't actually communicated, or that some of the audience didn't hear it. So I'll just take 1 minute to thank the sponsors who made tonight's event possible. So the number of people that supported the programme, like Adrian Jones, Charles O'Byrne, Jim Carroll, John Brown, the Corcoran family, Bjorn McConnon and his family, and the teams in Ulico with Ed Smith and Terry O'Sullivan's team in Iona have been core supporters, but hundreds of people have contributed towards our end of year campaign, and with their support, we raised over $136,000 tonight, which will go towards our supporting and expanding our programs next year. So we're launching our class of applications now. Today, right now you can go onto the Washington Ireland Programme website and get information about participating in 2021, when we'll have our largest class ever. And with the support of Bank of America, we're scaling our forums. And I suppose particularly want to thank the 3 core sponsors of Bank of America, the Irish government, who've been a long-standing and steadfast supporter, and the Northern Ireland Bureau as well. So thank you all for everything in the audience for joining us. We're going to close up the main panel now. Our speakers can stay where they are. Guiva's going to turn us off broadcast in just a second. But for everyone else, there are still sessions open where WIP alumni are there, and WIP forum participants are available to talk about their experiences. And also, please do check out some of the expo. But thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021. So thank you, everyone. And
Merry Christmas.
thank you so much. Merry Christmas indeed.